Hello, this is Georgina Rose, part-time esoteric content creator and part-time surfer of the Enochian Aethers, and welcome back to another Doc Darling YouTube channel. On this channel, we discuss everything related to magic, mysticism, the occult, and everything on the fringes of religion. And in this video, I'm going to be talking about a topic that I've covered a little bit before, but want to cover in greater depth, and that would be, what is the difference between a beginner and a intermediate or more advanced occultist, and really, how do you stop being a beginner? And first I want to say, the line between a beginner and an intermediate and an advanced occultist is kind of subjective. There's no like bar exam, like you know how like if you become a lawyer, you take the bar and then you take the bar and you're a lawyer. There's not that for occultism. There are some people who treat specific rituals kind of like that, but in truth, there is no clear distinction. But you know, the more I spend in this community and the more I progress and the more I've seen people grow as practitioners, I think there are some things that actually do delineate between a beginner and a more advanced practitioner. And if you want to stop being a beginner, I think there are some things you need to do. Now, I'm going to say something heterodox and controversial. I do not think the single difference between a beginner and a more advanced practitioner is how many books you have read, how many correspondences you've memorized, how fancy and many equipments used in your rituals there are, or any of that. I think the difference between a beginner and a more advanced practitioner is more about mindset and the way you approach practice and the way it's making you change. Because at the end of the day, we are not doing these rituals to do the most exciting ritual ever. We are not doing them to collect every single degree title in occult orders possible. That's not the point. The point of these things is to find our true will, gain knowledge and conversation, and eventually unite with the divine. These things are not the same as memorizing all the Enochian tablets. Those two things aren't actually as connected as you would think. And I have seen so many people in an attempt to stop being beginners, like go around memorizing correspondence charts, which we have the charts for a reason. You don't need to do that. Or trying to join as many orders and traditions as possible, right? Collecting as many fancy titles, feeding your ego, instead of actually doing rituals to change the self and get metaphysical effect. So I made a list of things that I think will get you from being a beginner to an actual not beginner, not what is perceived as a not beginner. The things that truly make the difference in terms of the quality of our practice and the quality of our relationship with the divine. Now, I did put these in a list form, but they're not really in any particular order. I mean, you could follow this linearly, but you don't particularly need to. These are just the things you need to be doing. When you get into occultism, one of the first things you are taught is the axiom, the Hermetic axiom, know thyself, right? It's written in a bunch of different phrasing in pretty much every religious and mystical text in the world. And basically the idea is to understand the divine, you need to first understand yourself. So we understand the divine in the material world as a microcosm and macrocosm relationship, as above, so below. And to understand the macrocosm, you need to understand the microcosm. And the ways that I think you should know yourself begins with looking at your natal chart. So your natal chart is the chart that exists when you are born. It is your birth chart, as it's often called. And I think you need to look at your natal chart. Now, that does not mean go on CoStar or AstroSeek or whatever and just put in the information. You need to put in the information and actually look at what that means, right? You need to learn all of it, including the aspects to your placements, because that makes a huge difference. And then use your astrological chart as a guide. This is where it goes from beginner technique to a more advanced one. Your natal chart is essentially the docs of your soul. And so when you see things that are lacking or poorly placed in your natal chart or with hard aspects, or you notice there are whole elements missing or whatever, that shows you what you are missing on a level that goes to your soul, right? What is actually not there. As well, by using transits and predictive astrology, you can see what's coming up ahead of you. And so you can do rituals to prepare for those future events so that they are the least painful as possible. And so seeing your natal chart as a data point to then build around is a really important mindset shift, and will take you from looking at your natal chart as some like cool horoscope thing and taking it into something much more profound, and then using that as your path forward, as a compass to the psyche. Now, the second thing that I would recommend you do is suffer. Yes, I'm serious. Suffer. No, we're all suffering. You don't need to seek out suffering. That's not what I'm saying. But you need to, when suffering occurs in your life, experience it. We do this thing that's called a surrogate activity, which is basically an activity to distract ourselves from what we're experiencing, right? That could be smoking weed, focusing so much on your work that it's toxic, going to the bar all the time, right? All these surrogate activities. And it is important to be social. I think introversion can be toxic in its own way. I think that becoming avoidant is not good. I generally recommend mystics live in society. You don't need to like run off and become a monk, but you need to avoid surrogate activities. You need to live your life in a way that's actually fulfilling and not just a distraction from what you're feeling. And when you have bad things arise, you have bad experiences, you need to lean into the feeling. We have this modern mindset that we need to distract ourselves from all pain. We need to pathologize all pain, right? All these suffering things. We are so obsessed with avoiding suffering that we never experience it and we never let it be a teacher. You see, fate is real. We understand this through things like astrology and tarot working. There is fate. And we need to realize that the suffering we experience is for a meaning. And so a good mystic is going to suffer and they're going to seek out meaning and purpose in that and use it as a teaching lesson. In fact, many initiations that you undergo are known as ordeals, which is essentially a voluntary painful experience, right? Like if you were to undergo certain ritual initiations, there are intense things that happen in them, things that involve suffering, because suffering is a teacher. And as long as you see suffering as something that just randomly happens to you and you are a uwu poor victim, you'll never find purpose and you'll never understand the cosmos, because the gods are not all good. They are chaos and beauty. Now, the third step is kind of a two-parter. This is like a 2 steps in one. So the first step is to begin a contemplation practice. A model that I have created about mysticism divides the parts of mysticism into 3 branches. And I'm very proud of this idea. I really hope it spreads because I think this is very true. There is study, that is learning things. You're doing that right now. Reading books, learning all those correspondences, that type of stuff, right? The learning. Now, part 2 is praxis. That is actually doing rituals. If you are just learning, you are a scholar, you are not an occultist. You need to be doing rituals regularly. You don't need to be doing them 24/7, but you do need a regular practice. Most people need to practice more, not less. There are some people who I do feel need to pull it back a little bit, but you just need a regular, maintainable, sustainable practice that's not going to burn you out. Now, part 3, and this is the one that gets forgotten, is contemplation. You need to be spending a lot of time in thought alone. Contemplation does not just need to be meditation. For me, I get most of my contemplation done when I am listening to music, though not really paying attention to the music, and going on walks, right? And then I think about existence and contemplate my life. That's good. Allow yourself to have those existential crises, because by contemplating your life, you will know yourself better and you will begin shadow work. So shadow work is basically an exploration of the shadow. So the soul is divided up into parts. There's a bunch of different ways people make these lines, like there's a bunch of different terms for it. Freud has his terms, Jung has his terms, there's specific terms in Nordic mysticism, there's terms in Kabbalistic mysticism, a bunch of different terms, but pretty much every system believes that there is some sort of shadow self or subconscious self. And what we need to realize is that every single action we do every single day is motivated. There is nothing we do that is random. And so by taking the time to contemplate and do that shadow work, we understand ourselves better and can make more conscious choices. And so now we're moving, of course, we are honoring the subconscious. We cannot suppress the subconscious. The subconscious is critical. You should never seek to get rid of your shadow. You should only seek to understand it and integrate it. But once we understand our shadow more, we can make better choices that fulfill those shadow needs without going in toxic directions. Because often the toxic behaviors and bad behaviors we do in our life are trying to fulfill needs that our shadow self has, just in counterproductive and damaging ways. And so by understanding your shadow, you can make better choices that actually scratch those itches. The fourth thing that I think delineates beginners from more advanced practitioners is the way they use divination. So divination, or fortune telling or future predicting, is using methods like tarot, runes, geomancy, casting lots. Maybe you're really trad and you read entrails. I don't know. But basically, it is recommended very early on in most systems to learn some form of divination. Most people recommend tarot because tarot has so many correspondences and there's so many resources. I love tarot. I'm a tarot reader for a reason, but pick some system and master it. Now, this is the thing though. The reason why this is the thing that distinguishes a beginner from an advanced practitioner is what you're doing with it, right? So obviously we use divination to predict the future. That's great. You should continue doing that. Ask divination about your life questions. That's important. I do that myself. I give myself regular predictive readings. But when it comes to using divination to guide our mysticism, I really recommend doing readings based upon the rituals you are doing so that you can see what's going to come out of them and what to learn from them. Because sometimes we will experience things in rituals that kind of boggle our brain, and divination is a key to understanding that. As well, when you are doing readings for yourself, look for what my friend called div mail, which is basically messages from the gods that are coming out in unrelated divination readings. I see this when I read for clients too. Sometimes I'll be reading about their career and there'll be a random pop-in that pretty clearly to me seems like it's addressing some deeper issue. So learn to look for div mail and learn to listen to div mail. You never pull a card for no reason. There's always some sort of purpose there. Now, the fifth thing that I want to bring up is a term that the New Agers love and I hate. So I'm going to reframe it because it's my channel. I can do what I want. And this is the idea of ego death. So I hate the term ego death. It bothers me. I think that it is a misleading term, but what it is describing, now that is important. So basically, ego death is a term to refer to like when you have a spiritual experience. Often people are talking about entheogens when they refer to this, but you don't need to do entheogens to have these experiences. You can have them through regular ritual, even through pure meditation. There is never a time where like you need to use psychedelics or entheogens, like not mandatory. And in fact, I think people often get really dependent on them in very toxic ways. But regardless, basically what happens is you have a ritual experience or a journey or a psychedelic experience or whatever your conduit experience is. And basically your sense of self is completely shattered. Now, this is not the actual destruction of the ego, because this idea of the ego comes from a Freudian theory of the id. The id is the primal form of the brain. It is also the unconscious. And so the id is like your survival instinct, and I would argue the id is not bad. Things like will would inherently come from the id, because what is the purest form of will but the survival instinct? Then you've got the ego, and the ego is the self. And colloquially, the word ego gets used to refer towards like egotism or self-involvement or self-obsession, or even in extreme cases, narcissism. And then there is the superego, which is the higher form of the self, the intellectualized self. And this is where morality, philosophy, all of that exist. And basically, a lot of people think you need to kill the ego to basically be ruled by the superego and live a more fulfilling life. Now, you can't kill yourself unless you literally kill yourself, which, no, suicide is bad. Do not do that. You will die when you are meant to die. Don't intervene with that. But yeah, the only way to kill yourself is to die. You cannot kill your ego, because the ego is your entire self. It is who you are, right? It'd be like reading astrology and not paying attention to your sun sign. That doesn't make any sense in the slightest. But what people are describing when they say ego death, a shattering of the sense of self, now that is important, because what happens is people are divorced from their true will, their true purpose, their true meaning. We are completely detached from that because we're detached from everything. Our modern culture promotes detachment, and not in some like stoic mystic way, but in a toxic way, right? People don't even think about what they want, right? They just go to bars, they get drunk, they just cheat on people. Like there's a lot of shit in our culture that is just not good and is detachment. It's avoiding the self. It's avoiding pain. It's avoiding everything that makes us humans and makes us able to have these spiritual journeys. And so when people have an ego death, that false mask that they have put over themselves, that thing that covers who they really are, that often they even perceive as themselves, because if you're living behind a mask all the time, you believe you are the mask, right? That is shattered. And that is the ego death. And what you need to do is you need to have one of those. Do that. Just don't call it ego death. You can have this through so many different conduit experiences that really any tradition can lead you in this direction. You can do it through psychedelics, though it's not really the one I would recommend, but that is a way. I find Enochian practices tend to often lead to this type of experience. I find initiatory rites often lead to this experience. And I find Saturn-based work can often lead to this experience. The sixth step that I want to bring up is the necessity of ritual purification. So when you do a ritual, you do some bit of purification. Typically, people will learn their first day of purification by doing the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram as a lead up to a bigger ritual, or as like a daily practice, right? But what you need to do is begin a continuous process of spiritual purification. This does not need to be as extreme as like doing the Abramelin ritual. That's like the most extreme purification process I can think of, but just generally doing spiritual purification regularly and consistently and making it part of your daily, weekly practice is so valuable. You can start with doing a big cleansing practice right after your menstrual cycle ends, or doing a daily shower. And in that shower, instead of just like shaving your armpits, thinking about purification and thinking about the miasma going away. The Romans did this really cool thing where when they would like wash their hands, they would do this purification of miasma. Stuff like that is great. Some people do specific things with their diet to represent a continuous purification process, or, there's a lot of ways you can do this, but having a continuous way of purifying yourself is really important, because part of what's going on during our spiritual journey is the purification of the heart and the purification of the soul and the alchemical transmutation of the self into something different. And so having something that represents that regularly is going to expedite that process and keep it going. Now, the 7th step is to consider what is our goal. And by that, I mean, what is the goal of this? Obviously, the goal is uniting with the divine. There's a lot of different ways to put that, but that's the end of it. And how do you unite with the divine? What does unity mean? Unity means the lack of separation. One of the mystic axioms that I really like from Kabbalah is there is no separation. And so we understand consciously that all is one, and we actually aren't currently separated, but it certainly feels like we are separated. And so the journey towards unity is less a process of physically uniting, but it's a process of awakening and realizing that we are already united, right? And how do you do that? Through dissolution, enmeshment, right? You have to dissolve the things that make you feel separated, dissolve the things that keep you trapped in the materialist mindset and trapped in this world, right? One of the metaphors that's used a lot for intense religiosity is marriage. And I really like that. Like, Christians use the term brides of Christ a lot to refer to women when they're wearing like veils in church. And that can read like a weird metaphor to people, but that metaphor makes sense, because when you get in an intense romantic relationship and eventually become married, what happens? You dissolve the walls around yourself, right? Love is about unity and dissolution, and so is our relationship to the divine. So you need to dissolve yourself and become one with the divine. And the way you begin dissolution is to see those things that are holding you back, those walls, and start hacking at them. That is very important. Now, the 8th step is to do something outside of ritual altogether, and that is to be conscious about your life choices and infuse mysticism more into your life. And to consider, with all the choices you make throughout your day, are you living in a way that aligns with your virtue and your goals or not? And so basically what I mean in this is just consider your true will through all action. In Thelema, there was a really cool practice that I liked called saying will, where basically, like, before a meal, you would say, like, what is the point of this bread? I'm really paraphrasing this. And you'd say, in order to nurture me. Why would it nurture me? Because nurturing me allows me to have the strength to do my true will. And so by doing little things like that, even over small things like food, it keeps you thinking about your true will and keeps you conscious about why you're doing everything. And when you apply that to all of your life, you begin living in a way that is more in alignment with your true will, and then you get to stop thinking about it, right? It becomes natural. When you do something enough, it becomes a habit. It becomes part of your nature. It becomes part of who you are. And by making these mystic techniques part of who you are, and by making being virtuous part of who you are, it's no longer a challenge, right? Through hardship, things get easier. And so you have to go through that hardship first in order for that ease to come later. Now, the 9th thing that I think will make you a more advanced occultist is to take some sort of oath or promise. Now, this does not mean you have to go out and join some random occult order in your town. No, you don't need to do that. You can do this completely solitarily in a solo initiation type rite, but I really do think it's valuable to take some sort of oath before the gods of following specific things that are important to you. Or even just the desire to follow the gods. That should be your oath, because this is a binding promise that's going to stick in your brain more. It's like how if you sign a contract and something's written in a contract, you'll remember it a little bit better than if it wasn't. And as well, when something is an oath, there's a metaphysical dimension to it, and so you're more likely to be held to it by the spirit. So taking some sort of oath, even if it's just something you write by yourself, like you write some vows, like I will be disciplined, I will honor the gods, like things like that are really important. And it doesn't really matter how you do it, it just matters that you do. Now, the last thing that I think will make you stop being a beginner occultist is to stop compartmentalizing your life. So human minds love categories. We love compartments. We love putting things in little boxes, right? It's one of our favorite things to do because it's how we think, right? It's how we process abstract information. There's a reason why when you're getting explained like the tree of life, like they have it on a chart, because that is easier for our minds. Now, when you look at it in another view, it's just a series of circles. And then you're like, holy shit, what am I looking at? We love categories, and we should use that type of thinking to our advantage. In general, the way we think and process information can be manipulated to benefit us spiritually. And we should be doing that. We should be considering like how we think, because individuals do think a little bit differently. But yeah, think about how you think, and then find a way to hack that and bypass that. One thing that I think is really important to have as a mystic is pattern recognition. So basically what's really important to be able to see something and relate it to something unrelated. That is a very important part of mysticism. And so the thing that'll make you not a beginner is to change how you think. And one of the first things you need to get rid of is categorization and compartmentalization. Now, use it to your advantage when you're learning new concepts, and use the categories, use the compartments, because that'll help you understand the new things more. So start there. But then eventually you have to kind of take those training wheels off the bike and realize that these things are not compartmentalized. What you're doing throughout your day is not separate from what you're doing in ritual. These things relate to each other, they impact each other. And so that last step is taking those training wheels off, taking those categories off, putting away the charts, because the charts are important to learn, but eventually you aren't learning anymore, right? You're experiencing. So take the training wheels off and see what comes from that. Make your entire life mystical. Make everything about the divine, and you'll realize that it was already about the divine. You're not even really changing anything. So my final thing I want to say is I really don't believe the line between a beginner and an advanced practitioner is having done some specific ritual. I don't think that's it. I think you can actually be pretty far down, like developing ritual techniques, and still have a beginner mindset and still not be progressing in the way that you should, right? So of course, learn more techniques. That's not what I'm arguing against. I teach techniques. I think techniques are important, because if you never learn techniques, you would never grow. But you need to be thinking about these other things too, because I think these other things are some of the biggest factors when it comes to spiritual development. So that's all I have to say in this video. I would like to mention that I'm hosting a group trip to Greece through Trova Trip. There is a $300 discount for everyone who signs up now, so please sign up and I'll see you in Greece. I also give tarot readings, and I'm supported through Patreon. On Patreon, you get an extra video every month, a ritual guide, and if you're a high enough tier, I do mentorship. And you can find me on Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, Telegram, Substack. I think I'm everywhere. I don't know a platform that I'm not on. I'm very regularly updating online, and yeah, you can find me all the places. And I will see you all in the next one. Please like, comment, subscribe, and ring the bell. And if you subscribe for 93 days, you'll meet your holy guardian angel, and you'll never need to be advanced again. You can just be a beginner. It's cool. And with that, that's our video. Have a great day, mid-morning, mid-afternoon, mid-evening, whatever time it is, wherever you are. Bye!